So today, the topic is Civil 3D points management. So some of the things we're going to go over today are the description key set. That's first and foremost one of the most important things for points management. And we'll touch on description key set hierarchy, kind of an unknown topic there, and how and why you might use that. We'll also talk about point groups, including point group hierarchy, as well as point group overriding. There's a lot of different ways to use point groups. We will touch on as many of those as we can. And we'll also talk about styles, including point styles and label styles, and how to use them, how to configure them, and most of all, how to keep things simple, right? So easy to make Civil 3D complicated. We want to keep things simple. So a little more about the description key set. We've got a lot of people attending today, so I'm going to try to provide some background, some intro explanation on some things, but we'll get fairly advanced in topics too, so it should be a little something for everyone. What the description key set is, it's a list of your survey codes, and so this is for existing surveys, topography surveys, and so forth. What codes are being used in the field. We have to list that, and it defines how to handle each point type based on those codes. So you can see on the graphic on the right, there's the list of my survey codes with a whole bunch of instructions to the right of the survey code on how to handle that, including point and point label styles and layers and description formatting and a number of things. We will get into all of that. We'll talk us through every single column in the description key set, and not just what it is, but try to provide some good recommendations on how to use them. Point groups you'll find on your Prospector tab. It controls display of points at what I'd say is a macro level. Description key sets control things point by point, point code by point code. Point groups are more about taking an entire set of points or all points and doing something with them. Examples of this might be to force a style to all points or a certain set of points. Common thing to group surface points. You know, we don't want a point that represents the top nut of a fire hydrant to be in our surface. We need to exclude that, and I don't want to have to make that manual selection every single time. We would also use point groups to be turning off sets of points, not just to force a certain style, but to actually turn them off and force a none style. We'll talk about that. And also to isolate sets of codes. What if I just want to look at the storm and sanitary shots? That might be 5, 6, 7 different code types. We can use some layer control for that. We could also have some point groups in place to very easily isolate those set of utility shots. Point group hierarchy, just mention it here, we'll get into it in more detail, but it plays a big role in point groups and how you use them. In a nutshell, what's on top is what controls, and points filter down from there. So if the top point group is not something that a point belongs to, it will filter down and go to the next point group. And we're going to use, what we do with point groups is to force styles, or to utilize styles instead of layers. Layers have their place. I'll touch on them, on why you might use some layers instead of styles in point groups. A big reason is through XREFs. Most of us know that point groups only control within that drawing, but you don't have any control once that drawing is XREF'd. So we'll talk about some considerations there as well. And point label styles. We're not going to get into really complex survey template configuration. We actually have a webinar that touches on some of that. But I will touch on one aspect here, which is the use of layer 0 in styles. And this is to allow description key layers to control rather than the layers inside of the styles. It minimizes layers, again, that simplification goal we're after, and it allows freezing and isolating. I'm sure if I could see people raise hands and I ask how many people freeze something or isolate something, and a whole bunch of other stuff turns off or something doesn't turn off. right? A lot of layers and a lot of different styles in Civil 3D. And to make some sense of that, we have to utilize layer 0 in some places. Reasons not to use it, certainly, and I'll touch on that. But use of this layer 0 overall increases versatility of our points and how we use them and how we color them through XREFs or through the main drawing itself. So enough background there. Let's get into Civil 3D and start looking at things. We're going to start with the description key set. Almost everything is referenced in the description key set. So as an example, I have a drawing here. I have some points inserted with some automatic line work based on this database that's opened on the left here. Not going to get into databases a ton here, but this is the site we're going to be working with. This is actually the building we're sitting in right now. This is CTC's property and building right here. And what I'm working in is the CTC template that has a lot of things set up already. As many of you know, out of the box, Civil 3D doesn't come with much for a description key set or point management tool. So I have to have something here because, well, we've only got an hour to go through this. So I will take some time here and there to set a few things up, configure some things. A lot of what I'm going to be doing is opening up a style in the key set and showing what has been configured. So I'm going to go right to my description key set, and we're going to start talking through that and what that's about. So I go to Settings tab, I go to Point, I go to Description Key Sets, and right here I've got my full description key set, and I go to Edit Keys. And what the description key set is basically a big table. As I mentioned on the left side, we have a list of our survey points and what to do with them. First thing I want to talk about is that code column and how to use the asterisk. What does the asterisk mean? Okay, we put an asterisk on there so that any code that at least starts with FO, for example, if it has any text after it, it'll still follow that code. Now there's some nuances to this. What if they type in, let's do this, a nice test. I'm going to take FO off of there, take the asterisk off of there. If I go grab a point and I set the code to FO1 and I hit OK. Now for that to take effect, I need to pick on the point and select Apply Description Key Sets. It doesn't change to the FO layer. So the FO layer should be vnode.com. It didn't change that. It's still on vnode ground. So that's not taking control there. What if I have FO space 1? Well, that's still text after it, but there's a space in there. And now what we're going to find, if I apply description keys to this, this is going to, in fact, follow or fall on that vnode.com layer, or -com, as set up in the description key set. So this asterisk, it only applies when there's characters typed directly next to the survey code. What about when I have a code that's, one is G and one is gas, okay? Intuition would tell us that if we type in gas, well, G asterisk would grab that because it has the text right after it. Not the case. Think of it looking for an exact match first, and then the asterisks come into play. So that if I have a code named gas, a point that's coded gas, let me go ahead and just change this one. So you can see that for an example. If it's coded gas, the description key set will force that. I hit Apply Description Keys, and now this lands on the vnode natural gas layer. Now, if it's coded GA, perhaps it was a miscode, what layer will that land on? Well, now it's going to fall under the G asterisk layer. So if I hit Apply, vnode ground, that's the ground shot there, okay? So, like I said, it first looks for the perfect match. Then, if it doesn't find a match, it's going to start following that asterisk rule. All right, let's move on. The style column. What about the style column? This is the symbol that we see out here. So I see a tree shot. And what dictates that tree symbol? Well, it's fairly straightforward. I have a point style in here. I can go look at this. And in here, I have a marker tab, and it's referencing a very basic AutoCAD block. We can see that right there. So setting these up is quite simple. You get block definitions into your drawing. They don't need to be inserted in the drawing space. You just need the definitions in there. Once they're in there, they can be referenced in these point styles. You can then take that block size, no matter what size it is, and you can scale that up and down with this scale factor right here. Okay, we're going to come back to styles in a bit and talk about layering. Okay, the label style, this is how the label looks. And right now I have a description field controlling this, or description label style. The ground shot I have number, elevation, description. That's why that's getting that label style. Okay, let's make this a little more trickier, and let's talk about the format column here. So what is this about? The format column is a way to translate between what's known as the raw description and the full description of a point. So if I pick on a point and I look at edit points, I have raw description and I have full description. Okay, the format column is the translation between those two. And this will become more evident if I look at a tree shot. Let's look at these trees down here. If I pick on this point, the raw description is TRD for tree deciduous, space 12, but the full description is 12 inches. This is where the format column comes into play. There's a concept called parameters with points. Parameter 0 is the survey code itself, and that's referenced by $0 in the format column. If you want to reference parameter 1, that would be the text numbers or alpha characters typed after the survey code. So let's look at this tree. Do I need to really have it say tree next to the tree symbol? No, I just want to see the tree symbol, and then I want it to show the diameter next to it. So I'm translating the raw description, which is what's typed in the field, to the full description, which is what shows up in our drawings. So in here, if I were to put $0, oops, let's do that for deciduous, $0, and I come out here and I apply description keys, it's going to label parameter 0, which is the survey code. But I don't want it to do that. And if we remember, in this point, I have typed in a second parameter. That's parameter 1, it's called. So what I can do is say, don't label TRD, label parameter 1. And now when I apply description keys, I get 12. But 12 isn't quite enough, so I put an inch symbol on that. When I apply again, the inch symbol shows up. Okay, notice I'm running this apply description keys command. You have to do this every time you make a change to the description key set and you want it to apply to points already in the drawing. The application of description keys also automatically happens when the points are first inserted or created in the drawing. So you won't normally have to be doing this apply description key all the time if you have your key set defined correctly in the first place. So what about additional text on here? What if I put in a type of tree, a species, right? Well, right now, if I were to type that in there, you saw me type that in there, and I apply description keys, it doesn't show up. There it is, my raw description, TRD 12 maple. Full description is still just 12 inches. That's because I'm only referencing parameter 1. I need to reference parameter 2. And what if I were to type more text, some comments or some notes? So good practice in here is allow for any number of characters or descriptions to be typed after it. You can go up to 9 parameters in here, so I'd say go up to about 5. 12-inch maple. So what defines a parameter? If there's a space in there, that separates one parameter from the next. So back to our point editor, TRD space, that delimitates, and now that makes 12 the first parameter, space, maple, that now makes maple the second, or parameter 2 rather. So now with that, like that, if the surveyor happened to type in any kind of other text on there, some notes or descriptions or something like that, that would now show up like that because the description key set is allowing that to come through. What is $asterisk? It means make the full description equal the raw description, meaning there's no translation between raw and full description. That should be your default. That should be what you need for 90% of your shots. It's going to be things like symbols where you have the symbol notating what the object is, what the shot is, and so you don't need to also have the description of it, or you perhaps don't need the full description of it, just a portion of it. Let's talk about layers. Over here, the entire point lands on a given layer. Right here I have vNode tree set up. If I pick on this point, I can see up here, lands on vNode tree. Pretty straightforward. This is what's known as the object layer of this object right here. This is a point object. But like all Civil 3D objects, we have the potential for more layers inside the styles that are being used. And here's where it can get kind of tricky. If I go and look at my point style assigned to this tree, let's go into TRD space or -CTC. You're going to notice on the display tab, I have no layers in here. Well, I have a layer, but it's layer 0. So when you put layer 0 in a style, what it means is bypass any kind of layer or display control in here and allow the object layer to control. In this case, the object layer is set right here. That's what the entire point object sits on. There's elements inside the point, in this case only 2, a marker and a label. So we could put a separate layer for each of those, but let's ask ourselves, why would we need to do that? When I only have one layer for this, it works out pretty nice because if I want to run a layer isolate, when I pick layer isolate on a set of points, the only layer it's going to reference is the layer in the description key set. It won't reference the ones inside. That's how you end up doing things like you layer isolate something and absolutely everything turns off. Because if we had layers inside of the TRD point style, if I had different layers in here, those would get isolated. They would get turned off, and the only layer that would be on would be vNode tree. So how do Civil 3D objects work? They're just like AutoCAD blocks. If you draw 2 lines in a circle, and then you turn that into a block, you've got 3 components in one block. Those 3 components could be on 3 separate layers. That entire block then also resides on one layer. Civil 3D is the same way. In this case, we have 2 components. They could be on separate layers, but then that entire object then sits on an overall block layer or object layer. Let's make it worse. Let's make it more confusing. Let's go into the point label style. They give us an opportunity for yet a 4th layer in here. And I have that set to layer 0 as well. So when you set both your point label style and your point styles to layer 0, and you make sure everything's set to bilayer, it'll push all color control and layer control to the object layer out here. And let's ask ourselves, how complex is a single point? You have a single piece of text on there, and you have an X or a symbol. One layer is enough, if you ask me. Now there are some options why we may go against that, and I'll mention those right now. Yeah, let me show them right now. What happens when we X-reference this layer or this drawing? Let me just start a blank new drawing here, and I want to X-reference that drawing. So let's bring that in here. And one of the scenarios may be that we want to turn off labels of our catch basins, let's say, of our inlets. Right now, I don't have any way to do that. I could go back to the source drawing, and I could change the style, for example, on that point so that it didn't have a label style. But then that might screw up another drawing that is also X-referencing that drawing. So there are times where you may want to put layers in there, but you want to use it real sparingly. And the reasons you might do that is so that we could freeze the labels in one of the civil drawings, for example. But it's a little tricky. If I freeze that, the whole point freezes. Let's undo that. I instead need to go into my layer properties, go to my XREF layers, and in here I'll find a vnode storm anno. I can freeze that, and then you'll see just those labels turn off. So this is the kind of detailed, minute plan production considerations you have to think through when you're configuring these styles like this. So what is allowing me to do that? If I go back to my source drawing and I take a look at my point styles and I go to catch basin, in here I've assigned one layer to the label. Okay. So what do I recommend? I recommend you put the label layer in the point style, put the unique layer there. Don't put it in the label style. And the reason I say that is because label styles, you don't need as many of them, and you want them to be flexible. Meaning, if you don't put layers in here, then I can have this point that's using this label style be on any number of different layers, and the color of that label will change. And to me, that's a good thing. Colors of things. I zoom out on this drawing. Not everything's white, not everything's the same color. All the labels are different color. They correspond to what I'm shooting. The curve shots, the labels, the X, the line, the figures themselves are the same color. So putting layer 0 in it allows a point. Let's just grab this back, a curve point. If there's layer 0 and all those styles that are associated with it, if I just simply change the layer, the color will change with it. This really supports conventional kind of AutoCAD behavior. And for perhaps project managers or kind of light Civil 3D users who don't fully understand all the styles and everything, this can be really helpful. All right, let's continue on here. Enough about layers. Let's go back to my tree here. We have what's called a scale parameter. And I can turn this on. In fact, I have it turned on for trees here. This is one of the most common places to use it. I can scale the symbol itself based on the diameter that's typed in there. And I just turn it on here, and I have to reference the parameter that's going to be typed in. So what this means is if I'm going to reference parameter 1, the surveyor better make sure that the diameter is typed as the first parameter, meaning it's the first text typed after the survey code. If that came after Maple, that doesn't work with how the description key set is configured. So what's in your description key set? People in the field have to be on the same page with this. I then have a scale factor. I've got that at 0.5, so I set it to 0.3. This is just a straight multiplier. If I were to change that and apply description keys, that symbol would shrink. So however big or small your blocks are drawn, just play with this scale factor until you get what you want to see. Let's talk about another thing. There's one other item in the description key set, which is a rotation parameter. And I don't see a ton of people using this, but it has its place, and one of the places is with signs. You might shoot a lot of signs in the field, and you may not, it might be a little confusing once you bring it into Civil 3D what direction that sign is facing. And so sometimes you can just put rough rotation parameters in there. And so let me show you how that would work here. So I want to rotate the marker Sorry, we're going to go up to the sign code. I want to do a marker rotation, okay? So if I set that to parameter 1 and I say marker fixed rotation, I just need to check this on. I could also rotate the label, but I'm not doing that. Then I can set it to clockwise. So let's go grab this point right here. Go to Edit Survey Point Properties. If I set that to 90 degrees, that's going to rotate in the way we have it. If it was at 180, for example. Hit OK. No. And then apply description keys. That'll rotate accordingly. So I see some guys putting in just kind of multiples of 45 degrees. Yeah, it doesn't need to be an exact angle, but it's based on a north azimuth. So that's rotation in here. We'll come back to description key sets in a bit, and we'll talk about a secondary description key set. I want to move on to point groups, talk about those a little bit. So description key sets give you all this macro control, micro control. Each survey code is unique. What do I do with that? I put it on a given layer. Okay. Point groups are about macro control or overall control, and there's a number of different uses for them. Sometimes it's not even about display control. It's just about grouping them for a given for your surface. So for example, I have an EG point group here. Look into that. I'm going to include all points, but I'm going to exclude points that should not be in the surface. A gate valve, a tree, a gas valve, underground utilities, in many cases a building shot, a top nut of a hydrant. All of these are points that should not be in the surface. So again, people in the field need to be on, needs to be programmed according to how they're doing that. So if you have 4 different crews and they have 4 different methods of surveying, it's going to make things a little tricky. Otherwise, we got to have 4 different point groups in there, or we have to have 4 different sets of survey codes. The more you can standardize the way your teams are surveying, the more streamlined and standardized you can make this Civil 3D template. So this point group is fairly straightforward. It's referenced in a surface, an existing surface, in that in the point groups category. And so if I turn this on, it's set to notice or 1 of 5. I think the layer is frozen on it right now. Those points automatically come in there, and that surface builds automatically. Okay. Surface point group, you should have that in your survey template always. Now some other things here. Now when you insert from the survey database, it'll automatically make a point group for you based on the points that you inserted. So I have an import event over here, 8101 building. The name of that import event, it makes a point group of the same name, and it simply includes a whole point number range, all the points that were created there. Pretty straightforward. You can use this to do a number of things, control some display on perhaps a first survey relative to, if the scope change, you have another survey, you want to be able to control that. You can have those separate point groups referencing those ranges of points. But let's talk about other ways to view our points. The way this stuff comes in right now, this looks nice. I have point number, elevation, description on a lot of my shots. What if I want to force number, elevation, description on everything, like these trees? I want to make sure that that stuff's coded correctly. I have a point group in here called number, elevation, description. If we go take a look at that, all I'm doing in here is including all points, and I'm doing a concept, what's known as a point group override. So a point group override trumps the description key set. So if a point is found in this, if a point code is found in the description key set, That's what's going to dictate how it looks, what label, what layer, and so forth it's going to be assigned to it, unless there's an overriding point group that's controlling. And that's the key, that's controlling. So overrides and point groups only control if they are the first one in the group. Right now, if I take a look at this point group, this includes every point that's in my drawing. It's everything that came from the database. But there's no overrides on it right now. That means these label styles have no bearing on how these points appear. It's the description key set. If I use a point group override, like I have a number, elevation, description here, I have only to shuffle around my point group hierarchy, put number, elevation, description at the top, hit OK, and now it forces point number, elevation, description on the trees, on the catch basins, the inlets, the manholes, absolutely everything shows me all the data. Now, this isn't how I'm wanting to print it or anything like that, but when I first import this data, I want to know what I'm looking at. I want to know exactly that raw data as it comes in. So what about other ways to look at it? Well, any way you want to look at your data, perhaps it's description only. This is pretty much the same point group, except the label style is description, not number, elevation, description. So if you have these defined in your template, I can just go grab description, for example. Push that right up to the top. Now I get description on everything. What if we don't want to see symbols? Let's make another point group. What if I don't want to see catch basin symbols? I just want to see points, just the X's for everything. Let's go grab number, elevation, description, make a copy of it, and then edit that point group. And we'll call it standard X. So I'm going to again include all points. Go to the overrides tab. Go to the style and force an override on that. And now I hit OK to this. It's going to force an X on absolutely everything. So however many ways you need to see your data, it will. You can force different display scenarios with point groups. Like I said, it's macro control. All points this, all points that. A subset of points this or that. So what about a subset of points? What if I want to turn off all these points except for storm points, for example? Well, I have another point group in here. It's called no display. If I push that to the top, everything turns off. It's kind of handy. What does no display look like? It has include all points turned on, and on the overrides tab, it's overriding the style and the point label style to be none. Well, that's great. So I can say, well, turn everything off with the exception of storm points. So I could have a storm point group in here. If I put that above no display, it's going to allow all my storm shots. It doesn't have to be a storm. It could be storm and sanitary. It could be all utilities. It could be anything. Whatever you don't want to turn off, you could have a point group that would show that. And if I look at this storm point group, this isn't an override. I look in here on the include tab, it's including all storm type codes, and it's overriding absolutely nothing. All this is doing is providing a buffer so that all of these shots don't get forced off by the no display. So there's this kind of trickle down concept. In the storm point group, the only points that are in there are those 4 survey codes. Then there's a trickle down. Then there's no display. Well, no display takes care of all the other shots because it says include all points. And what no display does is to force an override on everything. So it turns off everything except the storm points because the storm point group was first. So point groups can be rather confusing for people to learn. One of the simplest ways to do it is just name your point groups in ways that that represent how you want it to be displayed, and then just tell people to push that one to the top. Explain different scenarios. If they want to see all storm and sanitary shots, explain that you have to put storm and sanitary perhaps, and then no display. So that it comes down to not just one point group, but sometimes multiple point groups. Let's look at another point group. I have a plotting point group in here. This one's a little more complex. What I want to do with this is to set my drawing up for plotting. That's why I call it plotting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all shots that should not be plotted. So what I have in here is an override set to none. So this is like the no display point group. It's turning absolutely everything off. It's including all points except for all my symbols. So my trees, my flared end section, my gate valves, everything that I want to show up as a symbol, it's going to not turn those off. Okay. You could do this the other way. You could build it the opposite way. It's just that more often this list is smaller. So you could have put this list on the include tab and not had it turn off and use the no display point group, but I prefer to do it this way because this list will be smaller. So here's how this works. Plotting, if we push that to the top, again, it's all about this point group hierarchy management. We push plotting to the top, hit OK. And I should see more symbols, right? So why don't I see symbols? Well, we're up here, it's saying turn off everything except the symbols. We still have all the symbols points. How are those going to be controlled? Because the plotting is not affecting those. The storm points, all that did was affect the storm shots out here. In fact, it wasn't even an override. We still have a bunch of symbols that have not yet met a point group. It's kind of a way to think about it. They've been trickling down. They haven't been caught in that one. They haven't been caught in this one. They have been caught in no display because no display includes all points. So what we have to do is we have to set all points as second. And when I set all points as second, it allows all these symbol points to be caught by the all points point group. Now here's the catch with this. Plotting is forcing off styles and point label styles on all these non-plotting points. All points, what this is doing, it doesn't have any overrides. So when there isn't an override, if we remember, if there's not an override, it goes back to description key set. Description key sets always control, and that's unless there's a point group that's overriding it. So here's how you want to set things up. In your description key set, you want to have all your symbol points set with styles and label styles that represent the plotting appearance of it. And then set all your other points to just a standard X and a number elevation description, or whatever kind of default way you want to see your data when it comes in. So I've got railroad and I've got tops and toes of slopes. Okay, when those come in, I just want to see the standard X and a number elevation description. So that whole list of points, all the ones that have number elevation and standard X, those are the ones I'm saying I want to turn off. Those are all the ones that I force off with the plotting point group. So you have to have your plotting point group and your description key set working opposite one another, because this all points point group being set as second allows all those symbols to be controlled by the description key set. Confusing enough? Yeah, I think so. They're very powerful tools, but rather confusing. Point group hierarchy can be quite confusing. Once you get it though, wrap your head around it, it's pretty nice. So it's like I said, kind of review this video, and then you have to kind of play with it on your own. So point groups, lots of options there, lots of different ways to control things. They have applications in comping points, exporting them for staking. You right-click on any set of points. You have export points. You have delete points. All sorts of options through here to control how these things look and display. Let's talk about another type of hierarchy. Here's another scenario. I've got a drawing here, and in my case, I like to have these symbols scale up or down, depending on my drawing scale. So say I have a 20 scale drawing. The symbology looks okay, not too bad. But if I were to get bigger than this, it starts to get out of hand. Like if I have an overall master plan or something, and I go to 100 scale, now my symbols all start to get way too big. So for my small plan sheets, you know, the symbols look fine. They scale up and down for 20, 30 scale, 10 scale, and so forth. But what about when I go up to 100 scale or 200 scale? Then I have a whole bunch of symbol points that need a different style on them. And point groups kind of fall apart in that way because I need to reference trees and signs and inlets and hydrants and all sorts of things. So here's where a secondary point group can be nice. Excuse me, not a secondary point group, secondary description key set. So if I look in here at my full description key set, I have, let's go look at the CB one. I have CB. If I look into this CB point style, I have a block that's being referenced. That's the symbol right there. And I have a scale applied right here. But this scale doesn't work when I'm at a 100 scale sheet or a 200 scale sheet. So what I need is a different style assigned there. But I need that for a lot of different symbol points. So I need a secondary, what I would call a supplementary description key set, and that's what this one is here. I'm calling this large scale. So when I have a large scale drawing or sheet, I can apply this to it. And if I go take a look at this, this is a smaller description key set with just my symbol point codes in it. I've only set a couple of these, but if I look at the catch basin one now, I now have a point style assigned there. I call it CB large scale. And if I were to dive in there, I don't know if you remember what the scale was last time with the marker, but it was 0.2. I'm now at 0.05. So I've scaled this block way down. I've also said that in this master plan view, I don't want to see any of the inlet or catch basin labels. So I've just set a different label style as well. So you can take a set of point codes like this, might be 5 of them, 10 of them, 15, 20, 30, and define a supplementary description key set. And for this to control, we have description key set hierarchy. So right click on description key sets, go to properties, grab large scale, push it to the top, just like point groups, and hit OK. Now it's a little buggy how it works. It doesn't necessarily switch the order here, but the order is switched. So now with large scale being first, that will apply. So if I go to all points, right click on it, say apply description keys, it's now going to push through those description key sets, and I'm going to have a much smaller symbol. Okay, so this works great. So you might be saying, well, what if I extract this into one drawing to make a 20 scale sheet and then another drawing to make a 100 scale sheet, and I have one description key set for both of them? You're right, it doesn't work. You have to have separate base files. Description key sets, styles, point groups, none of that stuff pushes through an XREF. All you end up with is layering. So as a general practice, I recommend people make at least 2 base files, kind of a survey master one where the data is brought into and edited, and then a secondary one that's a civil base file. And then if you have to make a large scale master plan view like this, a third one where you have different point groups and description key sets configured.